It was just another busy Friday night at one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. Soft music played in the background. Waiters moved quickly between tables, and wealthy guests talked over expensive dinners. Nobody expected that one angry woman would turn a normal evening into a moment everyone would remember. At a corner table near the large glass window sat Daniel Carter, a young billionaire known for owning several successful businesses. He was dressed in a simple black suit and looked calm as he spoke with his business partner. Sitting beside him was his fiancée, Victoria, a beautiful woman who was used to expensive places, designer clothes, and people doing exactly what she expected. Across the restaurant, a young waitress named Emily was working her shift. She was 26 years old and had been working at the restaurant for almost 2 years. Emily was quiet, polite, and always careful with customers. She worked long hours because she was helping her mother pay household bills while also saving money for her younger brother's education. That evening, Emily was assigned to Daniel and Victoria's table. "Good evening," Emily said with a polite smile. "May I take your order?" Victoria barely looked at her. "Bring me sparkling water first, and make sure it's cold." "Yes, ma'am." Emily returned a few minutes later with the water. Everything seemed normal until Victoria suddenly noticed a small red mark on the side of her expensive handbag. "What is this?" Victoria asked sharply. Emily looked confused. "I'm sorry. The stain." Victoria pointed at the bag. "Did you touch it?" Emily immediately shook her head. "No, ma'am. I only placed the water on the table." Victoria picked up the bag and examined it carefully. Her face became red. "This bag costs more than you make in a year," she said loudly. Several people nearby turned their heads. Emily lowered her eyes. "I'm really sorry if something happened, but I didn't touch your bag." Victoria stood up. "You didn't touch it?" "No, ma'am." "Then explain how this happened." Emily looked at the table. "Maybe something from the food or the table caused a mark. I can call my manager." Victoria's anger grew. "Of course. Call your manager. That's what people like you always do when they don't want to take responsibility." The restaurant suddenly became quiet. Emily swallowed her embarrassment and calmly said, "I'm only trying to help." Victoria stepped closer. "You should learn some respect." Daniel finally looked up. "Victoria, that's enough." But Victoria was too angry to listen. Emily turned toward the manager, hoping the situation would end. Then Victoria grabbed her arm. Emily froze. "Don't walk away when I'm talking to you." Several customers gasped. Emily gently pulled her arm back. "Please don't touch me." That sentence made Victoria even more furious. Without warning, Victoria raised her hand and slapped Emily across the face. The sound echoed through the restaurant. Everyone stopped. Emily stood completely still, one hand slowly moving toward her cheek. Her eyes were filled with shock, but she did not cry. She simply looked at Victoria as if she could not believe what had happened. Daniel stood up immediately. "Victoria!" The manager rushed toward them. But before anyone could speak, an older man at a nearby table stood up and said, "You need to apologize to that woman right now." Victoria looked around angrily. "Stay out of this." The older man shook his head. "No." Everyone saw what happened. Emily took a slow breath. "I don't want trouble," she said quietly. "I just want to finish my shift." Daniel looked at her with concern. "Are you okay?" Emily nodded. "Yes." But something about her calm response made Daniel uncomfortable. Most people would have shouted after being slapped in public. Emily didn't. The manager checked the security cameras and discovered that Emily had never touched Victoria's handbag. In fact, another waiter had accidentally placed a tray too close to it earlier, and the stain appeared to have come from a small amount of sauce on the tray. Victoria's face changed. She had blamed the wrong person. But the biggest surprise was still coming. As the manager explained what the cameras showed, a woman at the next table suddenly recognized Emily. "Wait," the woman whispered. "Are you Emily Carter?" Emily looked at her. "Yes." The woman's eyes widened. "You're Daniel Carter's sister, aren't you?" The entire restaurant went silent again. Victoria slowly turned toward Emily. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. He had hoped this secret would never become part of their evening. Emily looked at her brother. "Daniel, I didn't want anyone to know." Victoria stared at the waitress she had just slapped. The woman she had humiliated was not a random waitress. She was the billionaire's younger sister. And now everyone in the restaurant was. For several seconds, nobody moved. Victoria looked at Emily, then at Daniel, and finally at the security monitor, showing exactly what had happened. The confidence she had carried into the restaurant was gone. "You're his sister?" she asked quietly. Emily nodded. "Yes." Victoria's voice became nervous. "Why didn't you tell me?" Emily looked at her sadly. "Because I want to know how you treated people when you thought nobody important was watching." Daniel looked at his sister. She had never wanted special treatment because of his money. She had always believed that people should be respected because they were human, not because of their bank accounts or family names. Victoria lowered her head. Emily stopped her. "You don't have to explain the handbag. The camera already did that." Victoria's eyes filled with embarrassment. "I was angry. I made a mistake." "You did," Emily replied calmly. "But the mistake wasn't the stain. The mistake was deciding that because I was wearing a waitress uniform, you could treat me like I was less important." Nobody in the restaurant spoke. Daniel looked at Victoria with disappointment. "You slapped my sister because you thought she was beneath you." Victoria started crying. "I didn't know she was your sister." Daniel's expression became serious. That's exactly the problem. His words hit harder than any argument. If she had been a stranger, would the slap have been okay? Victoria had no answer. The manager quietly asked Emily if she wanted to call the police or file a report. Emily looked at Victoria for a moment. "I don't want revenge," she said, "but I want her to understand what she did." Victoria nodded through her tears. "I understand." Emily picked up the handbag and placed it on the table. "Then start by apologizing to me without mentioning my brother." Victoria stepped forward. "I am sorry, Emily. I was wrong. I judged you because of your job, and I treated you badly. I had no right to touch you, and I had no right to slap you." Emily listened quietly. Then she nodded. "Thank you." Daniel watched his sister carefully. He knew Emily had every reason to be angry, but she had chosen dignity instead. Later that night, Daniel and Emily left the restaurant together. Outside, the city lights reflected across the wet street. "You didn't have to forgive her," Daniel said. Emily smiled faintly. "I didn't forgive her for her. I did it for myself. I don't want one person's anger to change who I am." Daniel smiled. "That sounds like Mom." Emily laughed softly. Their mother had always taught them that money could buy comfort, but it could never buy character. Inside the restaurant, Victoria remained alone at the table. The expensive handbag was still beside her, but suddenly it seemed meaningless. She had entered the restaurant believing that status made her better than a waitress. Instead, she had learned a lesson she would never forget. The woman she thought was nobody had shown more class in 5 minutes than Victoria had shown all evening. The story quickly spread among the restaurant staff, but Emily never told anyone about it afterward. She continued working the next day just as she had before. She still wore the same uniform. She still greeted customers politely. And she still refused special treatment. But one thing had changed. People who had witnessed that night no longer looked at her as just a waitress. They saw a woman who had been humiliated in front of everyone, yet refused to lose her dignity. And Daniel learned something too. His wealth could protect his family from many problems, but it could never teach someone how to respect another human being. That lesson had to come from within. Sometimes the person we ignore is the person who deserves the most respect. And sometimes the biggest mistake we make is judging someone's value by the clothes they wear or the job they do. Victoria had thought she was humiliating a waitress. Instead, she had exposed her own character in front of an entire room.